blood is thicker than water, is the most expensive lie we buy with our futures. When my mother canceled my 35th birthday to save my debt-ridden sister for the 10th time, she lost an empire. They assumed I would quietly sign the asset authorization like always. Instead, I called my lawyer. The trap they set for me was actually the grave I had already dug for their greed. Hello to all the wonderful listeners of Maya Revenge Stories, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for always supporting us. Unfortunately, YouTube has disabled our monetization features, leaving the channel with absolutely no budget to operate, which means we will be forced to stop uploading new videos here in the near future and will shift our continued operations over to Patreon. If you find today's story captivating, please support us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon channel to listen to exclusive true stories that are even better and much longer, featuring highly detailed situations that we cannot make public on YouTube, all brought to life with multiple emotional voices in a single story. You can easily join by scanning the QR code for our Patreon page on the screen, or by clicking the Patreon link located in the description or the pinned comment of this video. Now, let us begin today's story, told through the experiences of our main character, Daisy Santos. I am Daisy Santos, 35 years old, and a senior systems architect at Ethelgard Tech Solutions. My entire career is built on a single, uncompromising principle. I identify structural weaknesses. I design fail-safes. I isolate corrupted data before it has the chance to infect the main server. I am paid to see the disasters that other people cannot. Yet, for 35 years, I was completely blind to the parasite draining my own life. This weekend was supposed to be a celebration. It was not just a birthday dinner, it was a monument to my survival. Over the past 12 months, I had fought a brutal, exhausting battle against a life-threatening illness, the kind of sickness that strips away your dignity, your hair, and your strength, leaving you alone in sterile white hospital rooms. I fought that war in total isolation. I won. To mark the victory, I booked a private, expensive dining room in the city. I wanted to celebrate simply being alive. Exactly 3 days before the dinner, my phone rang. It was Eleanor, my mother. "Daisy, we have to cancel the party," she said. Her voice carried that familiar, manufactured, breathless panic. "Chloe is in terrible trouble. She is being sued over that new tech startup she launched. It is a disaster. She is frantic. Daisy, she is threatening to end her own life. I absolutely cannot be at a fancy restaurant eating cake when your sister is falling apart." I held the phone to my ear, staring at the blank wall of my home office. I did not argue. I did not speak a single word. I knew this script perfectly. It was a flawless, recurring algorithm in the system of our family. Every single time I achieved something, Chloe generated a crisis to steal the oxygen from the room. When I graduated with honors, Chloe crashed a stolen car. When I secured my senior position at Ethelgard, Chloe had a massive public meltdown that required expensive rehabilitation. Now, I had just survived a deadly illness, and right on schedule, Chloe was facing a massive lawsuit for a fraudulent business, and, as always, my parents expected me to step back into the shadows, open my wallet, and use my corporate influence to clean up her mess. "Daisy, are you listening to me?" Eleanor demanded, her tone shifting from fake panic to real irritation. "I hear you, Mother," I replied. My voice was flat, empty. I hung up the phone. I did not scream. I did not throw anything. Crying is a biological response reserved for people who still hold on to hope. Instead, I opened my work laptop. My fingers moved over the keyboard with mechanical precision. I logged into the joint savings account I had opened 5 years ago. I created and funded that specific account using my own salary to ensure my parents would always be safe in case of a medical emergency. The balance loaded on the screen. It was $50,000 short. I opened the recent transaction history. A wire transfer for exactly $50,000 had been executed just 2 days ago. The recipient was a high-profile criminal defense law firm. Eleanor had quietly drained my emergency medical fund to pay the retainer for Chloe's lawyers. Something deep inside my chest snapped. It was not a loud, dramatic explosion. It was the quiet, metallic click of a heavy vault door locking permanently. I picked up my phone again. I did not call Eleanor to demand answers. I called my private wealth manager at the bank. Within exactly 15 minutes, I froze every single supplementary credit card I had ever issued to my family. I deactivated the platinum card Eleanor used to impress her friends at the country club. I severed the gas and maintenance cards my father used for his vehicles. Then, I found the number for the luxury property management company that handled Chloe's downtown apartment. I was the sole financial guarantor on her lease. "This is Daisy Santos," I told the property manager. "I am formally withdrawing my name and financial backing as the guarantor for Unit 402. Effective immediately. Send her the legal notice." I closed the laptop. The silence in my apartment was deafening, heavy, and absolute. But for the very first time in my adult life, the air felt clean. I stood up and looked at the expensive silk dress hanging on my closet door, waiting for a victory party that would never happen. I left it exactly where it was. I packed a small duffel bag with thick sweaters and boots, grabbed my car keys, and walked out the door without looking back. I did not go to the restaurant. Instead, I drove north. I drove for hours through the night, leaving the bright lights of the city behind for the dark, winding roads of the Hudson Valley. I was heading toward the only piece of earth I actually owned. It was a massive, abandoned vineyard left to me by my biological aunt, Beatrice. She was the only person in our bloodline who had ever seen through Eleanor's toxic manipulation. I had never visited the property before. It was just a legal burden, a line item on my yearly tax returns. But tonight, as my tires crunched over the dead leaves of the overgrown driveway, it felt like a fortress. I parked in front of the rotting wooden porch of the main farmhouse. The freezing night air bit at my face, but I welcomed the pain. The family I had known was dead, and I was finally ready to build my own empire on their ashes. The morning sun did not bring warmth to the Hudson Valley. It only illuminated the decay. I stood on the rotting porch of blackwood vines, wrapping my thick coat tighter around my shoulders. The skeletal remains of grapevines stretched out in perfect, agonizing rows across acres of frozen earth. The farmhouse groaned in the wind, a hollow structure that mirrored the emptiness I felt the night before. But as I watched the dense fog roll over the hills, a black sedan crawled up the gravel driveway. A man stepped out, his shoes crunching against the frost. He carried a battered leather briefcase and introduced himself as Julian, the local real estate attorney who had managed my Aunt Beatrice's affairs. I invited him into the freezing kitchen, where the dust lay thick on the countertops. He did not waste time on pleasantries. He placed his briefcase on the wooden table and opened it with a heavy snap. "I am glad you finally came, Daisy," Julian said, his voice low and serious. "I have been trying to reach you for months, but your mother always intercepted my calls. She insisted you were too busy with your corporate job to handle the estate." I stared at the thick stacks of paper he pulled from his bag. My mother told me this place was a financial black hole, just barren land and unpaid property taxes. Julian let out a bitter laugh. "Barren land? Daisy, your aunt did not leave you a failing farm. She left you a gold mine, or rather, a water mine." He spread a massive topological map across the dusty table. He traced his finger along a blue contour line completely hidden beneath the boundaries of the vineyard. "There is a massive, pristine underground aquifer right beneath our feet. 3 years ago, a global beverage corporation conducted a geological survey of this region. They want the water rights. They have offered $15 million for a total buyout." The number hung in the freezing air. $15 million. My breath hitched, but my analytical mind instantly engaged. If this land is worth that much, why has it not been sold? "Because of the stipulations in Beatrice's will," Julian explained, sliding a dense legal document toward me. "Your aunt structured the trust very specifically. You are the sole beneficiary, but you do not assume full legal control and ownership until the exact day of your 35th birthday. Before that date, your mother, Eleanor, was granted temporary conservatorship. Her only legal mandate was to maintain the property. I read the clause. My birthday was in exactly 2 days. Julian pushed a secondary folder into my hands. I started getting suspicious when I saw the maintenance ledgers. Eleanor has been bleeding this estate dry. I opened the folder and reviewed the bank statements and invoices. My eyes, trained to find anomalies in massive data systems, immediately recognized the pattern. There were invoices for tractor repairs totaling $45,000. There were bills for roof replacements, soil treatments, and irrigation overhauls. None of it had actually been done. The farmhouse roof was actively leaking. The tractors in the barn were rusted solid. Over the past 3 years, Eleanor had forged vendor receipts to siphon hundreds of thousands of dollars out of the estate's operating trust. I tracked the routing numbers. The money had been funneled directly into offshore accounts and shell companies that I knew belonged to Chloe. My mother had been using Beatrice's estate to secretly fund my sister's luxurious lifestyle and fake startups. It gets worse, Julian said, leaning closer. Eleanor has been in secret negotiations with the Beverage Corporation for the past 6 months. She agreed to the $15 million buyout, but the corporation's legal team flagged the title. They told her she could not legally authorize the sale because the property automatically transfers to you this weekend. The architecture of my mother's betrayal suddenly materialized in my mind with terrifying clarity. The sudden phone call, the manufactured panic about Chloe being sued and threatening suicide, the canceled dinner. The crisis was a distraction, I whispered, the puzzle pieces slamming together. Eleanor did not cancel my birthday to save Chloe. She canceled it to get me out of the city, to make sure I was unreachable and emotionally compromised. Julian nodded grimly. Exactly. I intercepted a draft document from her lawyer yesterday. It is a full renunciation of inheritance. She plans to forge your signature on it and have it notarized by a corrupt associate, but she needs the document dated and filed before midnight on your 35th birthday. If you were busy celebrating, surrounded by friends in the city, you would have an alibi. By pushing you into isolation, she created the perfect blind spot to steal your entire future. A cold, electric shock of realization washed over me. I thanked Julian, took the files, and told him to wait for my call. After he drove away, I walked through the silent, shadowy halls of the farmhouse. I felt a strange pull toward the basement. I pried open the heavy wooden door and descended the creaking stairs into the massive, stone-walled wine cellar. It was damp and smelled of ancient earth, behind a row of empty, rotting oak barrels. I noticed a loose stone in the foundation. I pulled it away and found a small, velvet-wrapped box. Inside was a leather-bound diary. It belonged to Aunt Beatrice. I opened the fragile pages. The final entry was dated just weeks before her death. I have seen the rot inside Eleanor, Beatrice wrote in sharp, elegant cursive. I see how she feeds Chloe's greed while punishing Daisy's independence. I will not let them destroy my legacy. I have structured the trust as a trap. Giving Eleanor temporary control before Daisy turns 35 is not a gift. It is a test. Greed cannot hide itself for long. By the time Daisy reads this, Eleanor will have undoubtedly shown her true nature. Take the water. My dear Daisy, let it wash them away. I closed the diary. The shadows of the cellar no longer felt oppressive. They felt like armor. My mother and sister thought they were playing a game of emotional manipulation. They did not realize they had just walked into a legal slaughterhouse, and I was holding all the keys. I did not leave the cellar immediately. I sat in the damp darkness, letting the cold seep into my bones, recalibrating my entire understanding of my family. A system architect knows that when a network is heavily compromised, you do not immediately shut it down. That only alerts the hacker. Instead, you sandbox the threat. You let the virus think it is winning while you quietly build an impenetrable firewall around it. I pulled out my phone and dialed Eleanor's number. I needed to feed her exactly what she expected. "Mother," I said, pitching my voice to sound shaky, exhausted, and utterly defeated. "I am so sorry. You were right." "Daisy?" Eleanor sounded surprised, but I could easily hear the smug satisfaction bleeding into her tone. "Are you finally being reasonable?" "I was selfish." I forced the words out, letting out a heavy manufactured sigh. I was only thinking about my dinner. I know Chloe needs you right now. Please, just focus on her. I am going to stay offline for the next few days. I just want to rest. I will not make a fuss about my birthday." "Well, it is about time you showed some maturity," Eleanor replied smoothly, her voice dripping with condescension. "Rest up. We will talk next week when this is all sorted out." She hung up the phone. The trap was perfectly set. She felt completely secure, convinced I was sitting alone in my city apartment, crying over a canceled reservation. I walked back upstairs and transformed the dusty kitchen table into a tactical command center. I booted up my encrypted work laptop, established a secure connection through the Ethelgard Tech Solutions mainframe, and went to work. Julian had provided the routing numbers for the offshore accounts Eleanor used to drain the estate. My mother thought moving money through shell companies made it invisible, but to a senior systems architect, there is no such thing as invisible data. Every transaction leaves a digital footprint, a vulnerability waiting to be exploited. For the next 14 hours, I did not sleep. I tracked the flow of the stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars. I dismantled Chloe's financial history line by line. I was searching for the massive startup lawsuit Eleanor had mentioned. It did not exist. There were no disgruntled investors. There was no failed tech launch in the public records. What I found instead was far more devastating. I intercepted a series of heavily encrypted emails between Chloe and a criminal defense attorney specializing in federal offenses. My sister was not being sued by angry business partners. She was being actively investigated by the Internal Revenue Service for massive tax evasion and wire fraud. She had been funneling phantom investments through her fake businesses for years, and the federal government had finally caught her. She was looking at a minimum of 5 to 10 years in a federal penitentiary. The $15 million from the Beverage Corporation was not just a lucrative payday, it was a desperate, massive ransom to pay off the back taxes, the federal penalties, and the high-powered lawyers required to keep my sister out of a prison cell. They were going to sell Aunt Beatrice's legacy to buy Chloe's freedom. I picked up my phone and called Julian. I instructed him to find the direct contact information for the Director of Acquisitions at the Beverage Corporation. By noon the next day, I had the executive on a secure line. "This is Daisy Santos," I introduced myself, my voice sharp and authoritative. "I am the sole heir to the Blackwood Vines estate. I understand you have been negotiating with Eleanor Santos for the water rights beneath the property." The executive sounded hesitant, likely confused by the sudden interference. "Yes, Ms. Santos. We are finalizing the terms of the $15 million acquisition as we speak. Eleanor Santos does not have the legal authority to sell that land," I stated clearly. "Her temporary conservatorship expires in exactly 48 hours, on my 35th birthday. Any contract she signs will be null and void." I let the silence hang in the air before delivering the strike. "However, I am willing to entertain a deal, but I need to know her exact position. I want you to call Eleanor today. Tell her your board of directors is pulling the offer unless she signs a legally binding, irrevocable commitment contract by the end of this week. Force her hand. Make her sign it." The executive, smelling blood and wanting to secure the aquifer by any means necessary, agreed immediately. He did not care about family drama. He only cared about the water. By pressuring Eleanor to sign a fraudulent document, I was legally locking her into a multi-million-dollar fraud against a massive, ruthless corporation. But I was not going to let the corporation have the water, either. I had one final architectural flaw to build into this collapsing system. I drove into town and met Julian at his office. I transferred $200,000 of my own personal savings, the entirety of my remaining corporate bonuses, into a legal trust account. "I want you to hire the best ecological restoration experts in the state," I told Julian, sliding the bank deposit receipt across his desk. "I want them on the property tomorrow morning. We are going to officially register the entire Blackwood estate as a protected ecological reserve, precisely as my Aunt Beatrice outlined in her original, handwritten journals. I want the zoning laws updated, the wildlife protections activated, and the land legally bound to strict conservation status." Julian stared at me, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. If we register this land as a protected ecological reserve, it becomes legally impossible for any commercial entity to extract the groundwater. You will poison the well. The beverage corporation will not be able to buy it, even from you. Exactly, I replied, leaning back in the chair. By the time the corporation realizes the land is commercially useless, Eleanor will have already signed a legally binding contract promising them full extraction rights she never owned in the first place. I walked out of Julian's office and looked up at the gray sky. My mother and sister wanted to play with fire. I was going to give them the match, lock them in the room, and watch the entire house burn down to the foundation. Exactly 4 weeks later, the illusion of our family reached its absolute pinnacle. Eleanor booked a private dining room at the most exclusive French restaurant in the financial district for my highly anticipated make-up birthday dinner. The room was a masterclass in opulent excess, featuring heavy velvet drapes, towering crystal chandeliers, and a private sommelier who hovered silently in the corner shadows. I walked in wearing a sharp, tailored black suit, feeling less like a daughter attending a joyful celebration and more like a corporate executioner arriving at a final tribunal. Chloe sat across the massive oak table, draped in a designer silk dress that I now knew with absolute certainty was funded by my aunt's stolen estate. She had perfected the aesthetic of a beautiful, fragile victim surviving against all odds. As the waitstaff discreetly cleared our plates from a 5-course meal that cost more than most people's monthly rent, Chloe raised her glass of vintage champagne. Her eyes brimmed with perfectly calculated, glistening tears. "I just want to say how incredibly grateful I am," Chloe began, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "This past month has been the hardest, darkest period of my entire life, but knowing I have a sister who is always there, a steady pillar of support when my world is falling apart, it means absolutely everything to me. I love you so much. You are my rock." My father raised his glass, offering a mild, paternal nod of approval. Eleanor beamed, reaching over the table to squeeze my hand with a cold, manicured grip. "Ta vivas." "To family," Eleanor declared proudly. "To family," I echoed. The expensive champagne tasted like ash in my mouth. The heavy mahogany doors swung open. A waiter wheeled in a massive, multi-tiered chocolate cake illuminated by a single sparkling candle. As the waiter backed away, the atmosphere in the room instantly shifted. The grand performance of familial affection abruptly ended, replaced by a sharp, businesslike urgency. Eleanor did not even wait for me to blow out the candle or make a wish. She reached into her oversized designer handbag and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, dropping them unceremoniously onto the pristine white tablecloth right next to my cake plate. "Now, darling, before we get to the presents, there is just a tiny bit of boring administrative housekeeping we need to take care of," Eleanor said smoothly. She clicked a heavy gold pen and pushed it directly toward my plate. "Since you have been so incredibly busy with your corporate job, your father and I decided it was best to handle the tax filings for Beatrice's old farm. This is just a standard authorization form allowing me to continue paying the property taxes and managing the maintenance on your behalf. It will save you a massive headache." She tapped the signature line with her perfectly painted fingernail. "Just sign right there, at the bottom of the last page, and we can finally cut the cake and celebrate." I looked down at the document. The title at the top was unmistakable. Despite her desperate attempt to hide it, it was a formal renunciation of inheritance, carefully disguised under a cover page of fake tax boilerplate. If I signed my name on that dotted line, I legally surrendered all rights to the Blackwood estate and the $15 million aquifer buried beneath it. The silence in the private dining room stretched, thick and suffocating. Eleanor's smile remained frozen in place, but her eyes grew tight with greedy impatience. I picked up the gold pen. I felt the cool, heavy metal resting between my fingers. Chloe leaned forward slightly, physically holding her breath. Her eyes locked intensely on the tip of the pen. My father stared intently at his empty dessert plate, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. "A standard tax authorization," I repeated, my voice dropping to a low, quiet, an utterly flat register. I did not sign. Instead, I set the pen down gently on the tablecloth. I reached inside the inner breast pocket of my tailored jacket and pulled out my own thick stack of papers. I placed them directly on top of Eleanor's fraudulent document, aligning the edges perfectly. I actually brought some reading material of my own tonight, I said, leaning back in my heavy dining chair. Let us start with page 1. This is a certified bank statement showing the unauthorized wire transfer of $50,000 from my personal medical emergency fund, and here, on page 2, we have the routing history from Beatrice's estate trust, detailing the hundreds of thousands of dollars you meticulously funneled into offshore shell companies over the past 3 years. Eleanor's face violently drained of color. The smug, controlling matriarch vanished in a fraction of a second, replaced by a pale, terrified stranger. She opened her mouth to speak, but her vocal cords completely failed her. I turned my cold gaze to my weeping, fragile sister. And then there is the main event. Chloe, your acting was truly spectacular tonight, but I know you are not being sued by angry startup investors. I have the federal indictment files right here. The Internal Revenue Service is preparing to charge you with massive tax evasion and corporate wire fraud. You are not facing a civil lawsuit. You are facing 10 years in a federal penitentiary. Chloe gasped violently, her hands flying to her mouth. The delicate champagne flute slipped from her trembling fingers, shattering into tiny pieces against the hardwood floor. My father finally looked up, his face contorting into a mask of feigned shock and paternal outrage. What on earth are you talking about? Eleanor, what is she saying? We had absolutely no idea about any of this. I slammed my hand against the table, the sharp, cracking sound silencing his pathetic attempt at plausible deniability. Do not dare play the ignorant bystander with me. I checked the public property records yesterday. When Eleanor needed more collateral to secure Chloe's criminal defense lawyers, you personally co-signed a second mortgage on your own house. You leveraged the family home to protect a felon. And you sat there silently tonight while your wife tried to steal my entire inheritance to cover the debt. My father shrank back into his chair, physically deflating under the crushing weight of his own exposed cowardice. The illusion was entirely shattered. Chloe's mask of victimhood violently ripped away, revealing the ugly, desperate entitlement festering beneath. She slammed her fists on the table, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "You arrogant, selfish witch!" Chloe screamed, her voice echoing harshly off the velvet walls. "You have always had everything handed to you, your perfect corporate job, your perfect salary. You are just a cold, calculating nerd who does not even deserve that land or that money. We needed those funds to survive, and you are going to let your own family burn just to prove a point?" I looked at her, completely unbothered by her childish, desperate tantrum. "I am not letting you burn. Chloe, I am simply refusing to be your fuel anymore." I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my jacket. I looked down at Eleanor, whose hands were shaking uncontrollably over her fake tax documents. "My birthday was exactly 4 weeks ago," I stated, making sure every single word was precise and lethal. "Your temporary conservatorship over the Blackwood estate officially expired on that exact day. You possess absolutely no legal authority to sell the land, and the Beverage Corporation has already been heavily notified of your multi-million-dollar fraud. You own nothing. You control nothing." I picked up my purse and stepped away from the table. "Enjoy the chocolate cake. And just a brief word of warning about the bill for tonight. This private dinner costs around $4,000. I highly suggest you check your wallets, because I canceled every single supplementary credit card you have 4 weeks ago, and your primary bank accounts are entirely drained by legal fees. Have a wonderful evening." I turned and walked out of the opulent dining room, leaving the heavy mahogany doors wide open behind me. I did not look back to see their faces when the waiter arrived with the final check. The aftermath of that night did not involve any dramatic screaming matches or explosive confrontations. True destruction, the kind that permanently alters the landscape of a life, is rarely loud. It is bureaucratic, cold, and devastatingly precise. I did not have to lift a single finger to ruin my family. I simply stepped out of their way and let the heavy, crushing machinery of the law do the work for me. Within weeks, the Beverage Corporation unleashed their formidable legal department against my mother. They did not take kindly to being used as pawns in a desperate, multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. They filed a massive civil lawsuit against Eleanor for breach of contract, misrepresentation, and attempting to sell commercial water rights she legally never possessed. The corporate lawyers completely drained whatever tiny fraction of cash my parents had left, dragging them through endless depositions and brutal court hearings. Simultaneously, the federal government closed its net around my sister. Without the massive influx of stolen estate money to pay for her elite criminal defense team, Chloe was assigned a heavily overworked public defender. The illusion of her being a brilliant, misunderstood victim instantly evaporated under the harsh fluorescent lights of a federal courtroom. The Internal Revenue Service presented a mountain of evidence proving her extensive tax evasion and wire fraud. Facing a mountain of undeniable guilt, she was forced to accept a humiliating plea deal. She narrowly avoided a long stint in federal prison, but she was handed a heavy suspended sentence, thousands of hours of grueling manual community service, and a strict judicial order banning her from owning, operating, or registering any business for the next 10 years. Her fraudulent empire was reduced to absolutely zero. The financial shockwave quickly hit my parents' suburban facade. Because my father had foolishly co-signed a second mortgage to fund Chloe's initial legal fees, the massive debt defaulted almost immediately. The bank moved with ruthless efficiency. Foreclosure notices were nailed to their pristine front door. The sprawling, beautifully decorated house I grew up in was seized and auctioned off to the highest bidder to cover their astronomical debts. For Eleanor, the loss of the house was secondary to the loss of her social standing. News of the fraud, the federal indictment, and the foreclosure spread like a virus through her elite country club. The same wealthy friends she used to impress with my stolen credit cards quickly turned their backs, permanently revoking her membership and scrubbing her from their social calendars, disgraced and entirely bankrupt. My parents were forced to pack whatever belongings they could carry and move into a cramped, dark apartment on the outskirts of the city. In their desperation, they tried to reach me. My phone logged hundreds of blocked calls. My office received thick, handwritten letters filled with tears, desperate apologies, and the same old manipulative tactics they had used for over 3 decades. I did not read a single one. I instructed the mailroom at Ethelgard Tech Solutions to shred everything with their return address. I changed my personal phone number, updated my security clearances, and permanently erased them from the architecture of my life. While their world collapsed into dust, mine was finally taking root in the rich soil of the Hudson Valley. I resigned from my exhausting corporate job, trading the glass and steel of the city for the wide-open skies above Blackwood Vines. Using the funds I had saved and the remaining trust assets Aunt Beatrice had secured for me, I hired the ecological experts to fully restore the land. We did not just rebuild a farm, we built a sanctuary. The decaying farmhouse was gutted and transformed into a stunning eco-resort and operational headquarters for a premier organic winery. The land that the Beverage Corporation wanted to bleed dry was now permanently protected, blooming with lush, vibrant grapevines that produced some of the finest organic wine in the entire region. But the most important change was the people I brought in to help me run it. I did not hire standard corporate managers. I partnered with local shelters and advocacy groups, offering steady employment, fair housing on the estate, and comprehensive training to women who were rebuilding their own lives after surviving severe psychological and financial abuse. Together, we cultivated the land and healed ourselves in the process. The toxic, draining family I was born into was completely gone. In its place, among the sunlit hills of the vineyard and the strong, independent women who worked by my side, I finally found a real family. We built an empire of our own, and this one was absolutely unbreakable. 5 years later, the Hudson Valley sky was a canvas of deep twilight blue, illuminated by thousands of fairy lights strung across the massive courtyard of Blackwood Vines. Tonight was not just a celebration of my 40th birthday. It was the grand inaugural gala for the newly expanded ecological conservation wing of the estate. The decaying farmhouse I had arrived at half a decade ago was now a breathtaking architectural marvel of glass, reclaimed wood, and natural stone. The guest list was a testament to the empire we had built: local dignitaries, renowned environmentalists, celebrity chefs who served our organic wines, and the incredible women who ran the day-to-day operations of the sanctuary were all gathered, laughing and raising their glasses under the stars. Photographers from major lifestyle magazines were positioned around the courtyard, capturing the flawless victory of the evening. I stood on the Grand Master balcony overlooking the crowd, wearing a sweeping emerald gown that mirrored the lush vines surrounding us. A massive, towering birthday cake stood on the main stage below, waiting for the final toast. The air was filled with music and the warm hum of genuine joy. Then, the heavy iron security gates at the main entrance were violently forced open. The music abruptly stopped. A collective gasp rippled through the elegant crowd. Marching straight down the illuminated gravel path was Eleanor, my father, and Chloe. They looked weathered, desperate, and completely out of place in their outdated, ill-fitting clothes. Flanking them was a cheap, sweat-stained man holding a scuffed leather briefcase, who clearly looked like a bargain bin lawyer they had scraped off the bottom of the barrel. Before my security team could intercept them, Eleanor pushed her way toward the press photographers. She thrust a crumpled, yellowed piece of paper high into the air, her voice a shrill, hysterical screech that shattered the peace of the valley. "Stop the party!" Eleanor screamed, pointing a trembling finger up at me on the balcony. "Take pictures of this. The woman you are celebrating is a fraud and a thief. We have just uncovered the second, true will of Beatrice Blackwood. She left the entire estate to us, and Daisy hid it. We are demanding a full redistribution of the assets, and we are taking this fake empire back tonight." The reporters immediately started snapping photos, the bright flashes illuminating the ugly, twisted greed on my family's faces. Chloe began her usual theatrical sobbing, loudly proclaiming to anyone who would listen that I had left them to starve on the streets while I lived in a stolen palace. The cheap lawyer started aggressively waving the forged document, shouting legal jargon about immediate injunctions. The entire courtyard fell into a stunned, breathless silence. The guests looked up at me, waiting for the empire to crumble. They expected me to panic, to cry, or to call the security guards to drag my family away in a scandalous brawl. Instead, I simply smiled. I leaned over the balcony railing, looking down at the pathetic display of my past. I caught the eye of Julian, who was standing near the main audio-visual control booth. I gave him a single, subtle nod. Instantly, the massive digital projection screen behind the main stage flickered to life. The sudden burst of light caused Eleanor to freeze in her tracks. The crisp, high-definition audio system crackled, and a face appeared on the screen that made the blood instantly drain from my mother's face. It was Aunt Beatrice. The video was clearly recorded many years ago, but her sharp, piercing eyes stared directly through the camera, cutting straight into Eleanor's soul. If you are watching this video, it means Eleanor has done exactly what I predicted. Beatrice's voice boomed across the silent courtyard, clear and authoritative. It means she has tried to challenge Daisy's rightful ownership of this land, and because I knew her greed would eventually blind her, I left this specific recording with my lawyer, to be played publicly only if she dared to rebel. Eleanor took a terrified step backward, dropping her fake will into the dirt. "Eleanor, you thought you were so incredibly clever," Beatrice continued from the screen, "but you were always terribly sloppy. I hired private investigators 2 decades ago. I know what you did when Daisy's grandparents passed away. I know you intercepted the massive inheritance they left exclusively for Daisy's college and future." The crowd gasped. Chloe stopped her fake crying, her jaw dropping in genuine shock. Beatrice held up a thick ledger to the camera. "I have the exact offshore bank account numbers right here. account number 7492 at the Grand Cayman National Bank, account number 8100 in Zurich. You secretly created these black accounts 20 years ago to embezzle millions of dollars from your own daughter. You stole her foundation to fund your vanity. Turn it off, Eleanor shrieked, lunging toward the stage, her voice cracking with pure terror. It is a lie. Turn it off right now. But the final trap had already been sprung. From the front row of the VIP tables, 4 men and 2 women in impeccably tailored suits stood up simultaneously. They were not environmentalists or celebrity chefs. I had secretly invited the regional directors of the Financial Police and Federal Fraud Division to the gala as my personal guests of honor. They moved with swift, tactical precision, surrounding my family in seconds. The lead officer pulled out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs, the metallic clicking sound echoing loudly across the courtyard. Eleanor and Chloe Santos, the officer announced, his voice carrying absolute authority. You are both under arrest for the public forgery of legal documents, attempted extortion, and newly discovered transnational financial fraud. Based on the evidence provided to our department prior to this evening, you have the right to remain silent. My father tried to back away, his hands raised in cowardly surrender, but 2 officers grabbed his arms, detaining him as a co-conspirator. The press photographers, realizing the true story of the night, turned their cameras away from me and focused entirely on the spectacular, humiliating downfall of my abusers. The bright flashes captured Eleanor screaming and crying real tears this time as the cold steel locked around her wrists. Chloe collapsed onto the gravel, wailing as she was hauled up and dragged away by federal agents. I stood on the balcony, watching the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers lead them out of the heavy iron gates. The gates slowly closed behind them, shutting with a resounding, permanent thud. I turned away from the driveway and looked back at my guests. The shock in the courtyard was quickly replaced by a massive, roaring wave of applause. Julian raised his glass to me from below. My team, my real family, cheered. I walked down the grand staircase and approached the towering birthday cake on the stage. I picked up a glass of our finest Blackwood vintage. I took a deep, grounding breath, pulling the cool, sweet breeze of the valley deep into my lungs. There was absolutely no anger left in my heart. There was no fear lingering in the shadows of my mind. The heavy chains of the past were entirely broken. I looked at the bright, flickering candles illuminating the beautiful life I had fought so hard to build. For the very first time in my 40 years of existence, I felt entirely whole. I leaned forward and blew out the candles, completely and utterly free. Thank you so much to all of our incredible listeners for joining us on this intense journey today. I would love to know, where are you tuning in from? Please leave a comment and let me know what city or country you are listening from. If you enjoyed today's story, please remember that YouTube has unfortunately disabled our monetization features, leaving the channel with no budget to operate, which means we will be forced to stop uploading new videos here in the near future and will shift our continued operations over to Patreon. Please support us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon channel to listen to exclusive, true stories that are even better and much longer, featuring highly detailed situations that we cannot make public on YouTube. You can easily join by scanning the QR code for our Patreon page right here on the screen, or by clicking the Patreon link located in the description or the pinned comment of this video. Thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you there.